Cool. We can see the, yep, exactly. Once you get people out of the way, then go into presentation mode.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All
All
right.
right. Looks great.
All right. Very good. Okay, so I am actually here to give you a very long-winded excuse about why I was not at August camp last summer. In the 1980s, I met a couple from Colorado Springs while I was doing the Tour de Mont Blanc, and they invited me to join them on several backpacks in Colorado. And over the years, I was fortunate to experience Colorado with people who knew that backcountry like the back of their hands. It was really amazing. But it had been several years since I'd been back to Colorado, and somehow the Colorado Trail kept gaining traction in my head, and I finally committed myself to spending 5 weeks on the trail last summer. So what is the Colorado Trail? Here are some basic facts about the trail, and I hope you can see the map enough to kind of understand what I'm talking about. The eastern terminus lies just outside of Denver, and from there, the trail winds 485 miles to the town of Durango. But the actual trail comprises 567 total miles, because as you'll see on the map, there's a section in the middle where you can choose whether you take the collegiate east or the collegiate west routes. And also they continue to create more bike trails and more bike detours, which is really great. It gives the bikers and hikers a little more space from each other in some sections. And from a low point of 5,522 feet at the beginning, it finally reaches the high point of 13,271 feet at mile 373. And while the average elevation is 10,300 feet, there are long stretches over 11,000 feet, and there is almost never a day without a lot of climbing. And also the Colorado Trail and the Continental Divide Trail intersect for 314 miles in Colorado. And the trail is administered by the Colorado Trail Foundation, and they have a fantastic guidebook, a fantastic data book. They're a wealth of information. They have a plethora of trail crews. As you can see on your screen, all those blue marks on the trail, that's actually where they're going to be staging crews this summer. And it's a serious commitment because they have to get out in the backcountry with all their gear, often by pack animals, sometimes by vehicles or helicopters or other things, and spend a really long time working on the trails, which are by and large in really great condition. So this is the woman, Goody Gaskell, who was the real force behind the trail. So the first idea of a long distance trail from Denver to Durango came about in 1973. And the Forest Service and some other groups were formed in 1974 to start roughing out a route by uniting some existing trails. And this remarkable woman named Goody Gaskell, who I heard about for many years, attended that first focus group. But I don't think it's surprising. I've heard it from other people that she truly was a force of nature. And so when the going got really rough, Goody Gaskell stuck with it. And even at the point where some people were laughably calling it the trail to nowhere, she stuck with it. Somehow the governor and his wife got behind it, and they rekindled Support Foundation. Goody Gaskell founded the Colorado Foundation to create and maintain the trail. And it came to be, and she was involved with the trail right up until her death at the age of 89. So she's remembered with the Goody Gaskell Bridge over the South Platte River, and also there's a place called Goody's Rest just before the end of the trail. So when I was getting ready to head out, or I should say when I was getting ready to think about it, I was really thinking about the realities, doing my research, and there were things that I knew. First of all, of course, I was thinking about where am I going to resupply, and then I have to get out there. How am I getting to the trailhead? All of those kinds of things. I bought a plane ticket that was totally changeable because I had no idea how long it was going to actually take me to hike the trail. But there were some things that I knew. I knew that It had great trail towns. I'd visited many of them in the past. I knew that there were going to be lots of trail angels, that there were there was a great contingent of trail shuttlers to get you to the trailhead. I also knew that it would not be an easy hike, that it was going to be really relentless in its ups and downs, and that parts of the trail were very exposed, which leads into the next one, that it has vicious thunderstorms, and that sometimes there are unreliable water sources. But as I said, the Colorado Trail Foundation had great resources, and I availed myself of those. On the right side, you see their data book. So you're able to see exactly, how the trail goes up and down, where there are potential campsites, where there's water or not good water. There's a lot of tips embedded in the data book. And also, the maps, the physical maps are so good. So I looked at all of those, and I actually copied all of those into my phone. So I had digital copies of them as well. And then the other resource that I use that I think many of you are familiar with is Far Out, which I just use it all the time when I'm doing a long hike, because I could, as you can see on the left side, all those water sources, I can see where I am at the trail. I can punch on the water icon that may be up ahead of me and know whether or not the water is flowing, or whether sometimes when the water is flowing, whether there's a campsite near it. It used to be that they also put tents to mark camp spots, but the powers that be asked them not to do that because they feared that these spots would start to be overrun. In addition, there are ways of looking at the trail data so you can see how much you're going to be going up and down, and either get calmed by the information or get panicked by the information. So I headed out to Colorado, and the first thing that I did was,
Margot, before we leave that subject, we had a question.
yeah.
Somebody asked, did you try out the CMC RIMS trail application?
No, I've not done that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So at the very end of June, I headed out to Colorado Springs, and I stayed with my friend Susie, and she's one half of the couple that I backpacked with 35 years ago. And, well, as long ago as 35 years ago. And this was really great because I had a few days to acclimatize. And Susie doesn't backpack anymore, but she still day hikes. And I can tell you, she's well into her 80s, and she is still a very mighty hiker. So it was great to be out there. And on July 3rd, she drove me bright and early in the morning to the Waterton Canyon trailhead. And I had the obligatory photo taken as I set out. So starting out on the Colorado Trail, the first thing you do is that you have 6.7 miles of road hiking. And the road is actually really nice in the morning. There are a lot of people jogging on it, things like that. But I understand it is a canyon, and I understand in the afternoon it's beastly hot. Nonetheless, I kind of enjoyed it. It was like, if you think of the Tour de France, it was kind of my own prologue to the trail. And then, sure enough, I got up to the Strancia Dam, which is the water source for the city of Denver, and the bighorn sheep, the resident bighorn sheep herd, showed up for their photo op. And though some people really hung out at that place, I was anxious to get going because I knew that I had a big climb ahead. So I'd started off from 5,500 feet or whatever it was, and I knew that I had to get a whole lot higher that day. My goal for the day had been to hike 11.2 miles. So I finally got to where the road ends and the trail begins, started in up the trail. And I really, especially at first, I was carrying a pack, and it was kind of tough going initially. And then all of a sudden, here I was up at the 11.8 mile mark, where I planned to camp, actually very close to this place where you get these great views. But I was all ready to keep going. And some of the people that I'd met along the trail, then we talked about camping at 13 miles, but I just wanted to keep going. And actually, I was really happy. I made it, 16 point however many miles down, 16.8 miles down to the South Platte River, to the Goody Gaskell Bridge. And so a large group of us actually camped down there that night. And it was just really nice to meet a whole lot of new people. And of course, it's the first day of hiking. Everybody's really jazzed up and excited to be on the trail. And we got ourselves all set up, and it was quite the introduction to the Colorado Trail. The night was just, there were huge thunderstorms. I mean, your whole tent just felt like it was about to explode with the lightning. But the following day, I was really anxious to get on the trail because of any section on the trail where they talk about there not being water and it being really hot, it is on that second section of trail. And so as you can see here, just so you know, as we go forward, the total miles, that's the miles I hiked that day. And where it says elevation, that's this elevation that I ended at. So I walked through this this burn area. This is left from the Buffalo Creek fire in 1996. That was a human-caused fire, very severe fire, and it's been really quite slow to come back. And they give you very stern warnings that you're going to be walking for many, many miles with no water and full sun, and to really be very vigilant on this section of trail that you have plenty of water with you. And even though so you can see the trail here is in good shape, there were a lot of really lovely flowers, even though it was such a dry area. And it just continued on up and up and up. But just before noon, as you can see in that right-hand picture, it's noontime in Colorado, and guess what's appearing? There are gray clouds appearing. And I was kind of in a really good mood, and I wasn't paying too much attention. That didn't look too serious to me. But I continued on ahead, and the clouds continued on ahead, and it started to get pretty thundery. Thunder was booming around me. I thought I had about 2 miles to go to this fire station where there would be shelter, and there's a water spigot that's also at the fire station. So I continued on. Well, the thunder got very intense and it started to really rain, and there was some lightning, and I was in a very exposed area. This is called Introduction to the Colorado Trail. And it was a moment where I got pretty unnerved, but I also realized there was really nowhere for me to go. And I just summoned up my courage and forged ahead. And I will say I walked and I walked and I walked, and I thought, where's that blankety blank fire station? But just as after the sun came out, lo and behold, I finally came to the salt shelter where there were many people gathered. Several of them said, Margot, we've been waiting for you. Where have you been? We worried about you. And there was also the spigot with the water. So it was a great moment to be able to just lay all my stuff out, get dry, and then continue on my way. So I continued on down the trail, and I will tell you, the picture taking ended for the day. One of the things you'll see as we go forward is there are days where it was so wet, either my phone didn't come out or it got put away early. But the next day it dawned, and I began hiking through the lifting fog. It was just such a gorgeous morning. But this was day 3. And I will say, I was a little suspicious of the day because I've had a lot of backpacking trips where day 3s turned into epics. And I was a little concerned. I hope this isn't going to be an epic day in any way. But it seemed like it was a really beautiful day, and I got in a whole lot of miles. When I stopped for a snack, I realized, uh-oh, I'm not in quite the right place. And I realized that I had walked probably a little over a half mile. That trail sign that's in the upper left-hand corner, actually, the way that it's positioned beside the trail, you can walk right by it and never realize that you're supposed to turn left there, because it actually is right by your left shoulder. It's a very poorly positioned sign. Most of the signs in the trail are good, but not this one. And I had walked past it, so I had to backtrack a little bit. So in my own way, there was the beginning of a day 3 epic. So once again, as you can see here, noontime came and the clouds started rolling in, and the weather continued to deteriorate as I made my way past this rifle range, which was in use, I should say. So when they say, please stay on the trail, it didn't take very much to make me decide that I really wanted to stay on the trail. And then entered the Lost Creek Wilderness. Those are not my clothes hanging off the sign, but actually there are there's a lot of good signage as you go in and out of the wilderness areas on the Colorado Trail. But this light rain became heavier, and then it turned to hail. And you cannot imagine how happy I was when I saw a tent up ahead. I mean, I'm getting hailed on, I'm getting rained on, and I see this tent, and immediately I know what it is, and it's trail magic. And so there was a small group of people, and they had a tent set up. They had cold drinks, they had beer, they had all kinds of food. They had backpacking food in case you needed more food to take with you. And one of the hosts was this woman pictured with me on the bottom, who smoked a corncob pipe and was insisting on getting her picture taken with every single hiker who came through. And I was so glad to just have that moment to just sit and relax and get dry, because when I headed up the trail, the rain persisted, and I had another 2 miles to hike before I got to a place where I could set up my tent, crawl inside, and watch the next bunch of hail come down again. So the next day, as usual, the day dawned. It was beautiful, turned into a lovely bluebird sky. And just as I expected, the really, really muddy trail, and it went up, then it turned into a very rocky road. So some of these old logging roads are very rough. That's actually much harder than the trail itself. But it finally came out onto this really lovely meadow. And I was really happy to have this place that with the full sun, that I could take out my soggy tent and get it all dry and sit and enjoy my lunch before heading up the trail. And it looked like this really beautiful meadow. I remember when I started out, it just was such a nice hike, and it rose up very steadily. But it went on for 6 miles, and it was very unrelenting. Periodically, the trail would kind of go along the edge of the woods, and when it was going there were just these irises everywhere that were absolutely pretty. And I tried to focus on the irises and not on feeling like that I was never going to reach the end of this meadow. But when I finally did, I went through just a brief area of woods, and then came out to this great view, and just being able to look out and see the mountains ahead was, I don't know, it just reset my positive attitude. And then the only other problem with being at this high point was that I took my phone out of airplane mode, got my messages, and I got a message that my resupply box that I was supposed to get a few days down the trail seemed to have gone missing. But I came down to a lovely creek. I found a great campsite, and there was a whole group of jolly teachers from Denver, and it was just so fun to be next to a bunch of people who just were laughing all afternoon. And then yeah, on the 7th, continuing on up, it was a beautiful hiking day, more irises, more early flowers, and the best of all, I turned on my phone, and my resupply had been located, so I could relax about that. And so we continued. The trail at this point was pretty straight ahead, and we continued on. And there were actually a group of us that had kind of come together, were hiking together, but there wasn't a sense of the big mountains. It was a pleasant trail, but there wasn't anything really brilliant about it. But as we came along, we could start to see a road, and we could start to hear the highway, but it still felt like we were never going to get down to the pass at Kenosha Pass. But when we finally got down there was Roxanne, this woman standing behind the black chair, another trail angel, and she had this huge SUV that was totally full of food. So we sat there for the longest time, several of us, before we headed across the street to the National Forest Campground, where, using my senior pass, I got a $12 site, and the camp manager had no problem at all with us putting up 5 or 6 tents in that one space. So the next day, I think, let me just see, yeah. This is the next morning, and I was waiting by the Kenosha Pass sign, which is where I had told the person who was bringing my resupply that I would meet him. And it's actually kind of an amusing place to stand because it's covered with stickers from all over everywhere. But I also knew starting out that this was going to be a low mileage day, depending upon how soon I was going to get started. So heading up the trail, it would really quickly, I passed this teepee, and this was the first of many teepees that I saw along the Colorado Trail. And I've never gotten any explanation of what they're about or who built them. But there were views galore, and it was just so much fun to see so much ahead of me and think about, well, what is out there? And then, to get to a point where you could really start to see the Continental Divide. And one thing about the Colorado Trail, I don't know how many times I crossed the Continental Divide in the course of this hike, but there were many, many times. So there are not a lot of trail signs with mileage on them in the course of the trail. So it was really nice to see this one that showed me that I was exactly in between Kenosha Pass, where I'd come from. I'd come 6 miles, and I had 6 miles to get to Georgia Pass, which was actually one of my first goal for the very next morning. And this was also a much better sign than what apparently was the previous sign, which I think must have been done in by woodpeckers. So this was only a 9-mile day, but I was very satisfied having gotten such a late start, and it was a really, really good day. So in my head, I still had images of the passes on the John Muir Trail, which were really rocky and dramatic, very angular. But rising to Georgia Pass was nothing like that. It was a pretty steady grunt up, going through some patches of snow that was still there. I actually followed a guy, a somewhat older guy, and his daughter pushing their mountain bikes, and they would get on them. It seemed to me like they would get on them for about 30 yards, and then they'd stop and start pushing again. And this kept getting repeated until just about the point in the right-hand photo where they got on the bikes and really truly were able to keep going. And I'll tell you, I got to that point and I thought, Georgia Pass looks so easy. It was still a long ways to go. But it was beautiful when I got up there. This was a view as I was sitting. This was the view to my left. And this is the view in front of me. And when I'd left that morning, I thought, well, I'll have breakfast at the pass, which I often do. I often don't have breakfast before I leave, or I may have just a granola bar and have something more further up the trail. And I got up to the pass and it was just way too cold. So I paused long enough to, again, check my phone and then head down the trail. And this was you get down, of course, really quickly. So from 11,874 feet, I dropped very quickly down to just under 10,000 feet. And then that night, this actually is it's not too far from where I was camped, but that night before I was able to camp that night, I went back up to about 11,200 feet and I found a really nice spot on a ridge. The only problem was that I was in an area that was just full of widowmakers. So I had a great campsite, but I was really hoping that it didn't get too windy during the night because it was not the smartest place to camp. And also it was a dry camp. There was no water nearby. So I really had to ration my water. But on July 10th, the following day, I passed the 100-mile mark, which was really fun. And then continued on down the trail. And one of the things on the Colorado Trail that's really disheartening, or just to say out west in many areas, is the huge swath of forests that have been killed by beetles. So you get these whole huge areas, and you'll see them in pictures that are just, all the forests are dead. And one of the things that the trail crews do is that they go along the trail and they cut down the trees in the immediate vicinity of the trail just as a safety precaution. And the other great thing about this is that I knew that I was that a real food and bed was just 10 miles away. And I'll tell you, those 10 miles were really pretty ones as I came down. Whoops. That was looking over towards where I was going to be hiking 48 hours after that. And I was really wondering where I was going to be. And then you got to this wonderful place that seemed to be out in the middle of nowhere, but there was this lovely bench looking out on the scene that you see in this bigger picture. And I will say also that gray rain cloud, it was somewhere else. It never came close to me that day. That was a really good sign. So I got down to Frisco, and it was really easy. You get to the bottom of the trail, you cross the road, and you get picked up by the shuttle bus, and it takes you right into the town of Frisco. And the first stop, of course, was to go and get my motel room. And then the next stop was to go to the post office and pick up my resupply, come back to the motel, take a shower, and then find some good food. And I opted to take a total rest day. I didn't hike at all on July 11th. I made the rounds of what was in town, ate a lot of food, made a quick trip to Walmart via this great shuttle system, and picked up a few things I needed. And I also went to the local bakery and fueled up. I found a couple of things to fuel up for the next day. So the shuttle bus actually was right in front of my motel, so it was really easy to pick it up the very first bus in the morning. And I'd heard so much about how hard this section of trail was from over to Copper Mountain. So I was a little anxious to see for myself. A lot of people choose to slack path this section in the opposite direction. They actually take the shuttle to Breckenridge with nothing other than a day pack, and they hike it in the other direction back to Frisco. But I, being a little stubborn, I said, no, I'm just gonna hoist my pack, which was full since I'd just gotten a resupply. And I started up the trail. And my journal read, the day started well with a raspberry turnover, and the initial climb felt pretty good. So yeah, it started off pretty good. And it was a really beautiful morning. I'm heading up and just trying to figure out, okay, where is it that I'm going to cross? And that the light, it was just, it really was nice. And the trail just slowly made its way up, and then it started climbing really a whole lot more. And then as I got further up, okay, now we're getting serious. And I'm also starting to see gray clouds. So I'm wondering, okay, what is going on here? So on the left side, you see a snow patch with some red flags, and that is because early in the season, people actually do this hike in the snow, but the red flags were actually marking where the trail went. But it had melted out enough. There were a few minor patches of snow. But at 1:30 in the afternoon, I'm seeing a whole lot of gray clouds, kind of not serious rain clouds, but they're up there. But I'm also seeing beautiful views. This is looking back towards Frisco and then up to Breckenridge. And the trail, as the trail gets higher and higher, I'm listening for thunder and trying to plan, okay, what am I going to do if it starts, if I have a real thunderstorm? But there was nothing. So I just continued on up to the top of this pass, which is actually at 12,000, almost 12,500 feet. And you're actually crossing what's called the 10-mile range. And the minute that I stepped over that pass, I was hit by the most amazing storm. I had sleet coming at me sideways. Actually, if you could have seen my pants afterwards, my entire right side was totally drenched. My left side was dry, but and the wind was blowing really ferociously. And my first thought was, holy tamale, I got to get some clothes on. And I thought, don't worry about your pack cover. It doesn't matter if the pack gets wet at this point. Just get yourself warm and start down. And I did that so fast. And I almost started running down that mountain. And at one point, I thought, geez, I hope there wasn't a trail intersection. I didn't see one up there, but I hope I'm running down the right way. But in any case, I see a town down there, so I'm going to keep going. Well, it did not take long before, I mean, this was probably half an hour later. The storm had totally moved out, and looking back up the mountain, it was just absolutely gorgeous. But what happened when I get down to the bottom and I got to the Copper Mountain Resort is that there's all this road construction going on, and the trail, that was this big detour that was very poorly marked that wended its way through the resort area. And I walked, it felt like miles until I got to the far edge of the trail, walked up under a ski lift because I could see that the trail was up there. And I went 2 miles further. I was supposed to go 3 miles further according to the rules, because the rules say you cannot camp within 3 miles of Copper Mountain. But guess what? I had been hiking almost 6.5 miles and I was toast. I was not going to go one step further. The next day was an absolutely beautiful day. But as you can see, I hiked 6.2 miles. That was not on my agenda at all. And as I started up, the flowers were beautiful. I was really enjoying the hike. But every time there was a gray cloud, I started to get myself in this, oh my goodness, is there going to be another big bunch of thunderstorms? Because I knew that I was climbing up to this ridge and I was going to be going across the top of this ridge for a considerable way. And I was so uncomfortable. And at a certain point, I said, whoops, sorry. And so I just said to myself, stop. You just need to stop and you need to regroup. And so you can see on the right-hand side, I've set my tent up in a really lovely grove. Down below me is a cabin called Janet's Cabin, which is part of the 10th Mountain Division hut system. And I spent the afternoon just wandering around, seeing a little bit where the trail went, and just looking at flowers. And I've got to tell you, that was such a great decision, because even though I got a little behind in my hiking mileage, I had gained so many mental miles. And my journal just says, what a lovely day. And it really helped me to remember why I was on the trail in the first place. But the next morning I got up really early and set out. The sun was just starting to rise. The coyotes were howling and there were flowers and marmots, and it was just an absolutely incredibly beautiful hike along this ridge. And this became one of my favorite days. So it continued on up to Kokomo Pass. This is now looking down the other side of Kokomo Pass. Now you have a whole new view of a whole new range of mountains. And that's what's so amazing about this trail, is you just move from one range to the next. And I came down to a place called Camp Hale. And this is what's left of the old barracks at Camp Hale. So this was where in 1942, this was established to train the soldiers in the 10th Mountain Division for winter mountain warfare. And if you don't know anything about the 10th Mountain Division, they played a really critical role in World War II. And they were handpicked, a handpicked group of mountaineers and skiers and outdoor enthusiasts who were known for their physical prowess and affinity for rugged environments. And I can tell you, this was rugged environments. And when I saw these barracks, I thought, holy tamale, just to be there. And if you can imagine being there in the middle of winter, I thought they could have survived anything. So continued on a bit down the trail. I mean, this really truly was one of my favorite days of the trip. So again, the next morning, headed out before breakfast, and I'm heading down the trail, and I get to this place where there's this bridge. Now, you have to understand there are mountain bikers that frequent these trails, and I'm not a hardcore mountain biker by any stretch of the imagination. But this was a series of small logs side by side on a set up in such a way that it had a lot of bounce to it. And I thought, I hope that this is not a trail I would like to be going on too fast. But it was another really gorgeous day. But again, I'm really not sure how I ended up. I knew that I had wanted to go to Bear Lake, but I do not recall there being a sign. But all of a sudden there I was, and I sat and I had a snack, but I had a devil of a time trying to find my way back to the trail, because I had done a lot of just exploring around the lake, and all of a sudden I was really needing to use my GPS to get back on the trail. And fortunately, there was another couple in the same situation, and among the three of us, we managed to get back on the trail. And I think the rest of the day was probably pretty uneventful from the point of view of scenery, but I came to a really nice campsite on Bus Creek where I could actually take a dip. This is the lower part of Bus Creek, and it was a really nice campsite. And I actually met this guy named Shark Bait. That was his trail name. And we actually had met previously on the trail, but had never had time really to talk to one another. But this time we had dinner together. This guy was 27, a very nice, low-key guy. And we were talking about our motivations for doing the trail. And I said to him, you know, what made you decide to do the trail? And he said, well, I'm hiking 500 miles for having 5 years with my new heart. So he had received a new heart 5 years prior, when he was very young still. And it was such an inspiring story to me to see someone out there doing what is really a very rigorous outdoor activity and just living life to the fullest. So again, it had rained at night, so the whole challenge of the day was to get dry when the sun finally came out. And I noted in my journal, I tried to be positive on the uphills and not let them defeat me. But I was a little worried because my food supply was getting low and the toilet paper supply was getting low. The following morning, though, I knew that I had only a short hike down into Twin Lakes, and I was really looking forward to getting there. I knew I was going to spend a night in the bed, and it just seemed to be like, this is it. I was going to pick up a food resupply, get a new resupply of toilet paper. And so I boogied down that trail as fast as I could. And it was a very pretty morning. And then it came down a very rough logging road. And right down below these trees actually is the little village of Twin Lakes. And I could not figure out how to get actually over to the village. So I ended up cutting through someone's backyard. And I think there must be other people that have done that, because I've noticed that that's one of the jobs for the volunteers this summer is remedying the access to Twin Lakes. So Twin Lakes was really great. I mean, the first thing I did was to pick up my resupply, but then you'll see what happened next.
Oh, look at this most perfect lunch right here. How's that taste? Yeah, 2 thumbs up. I like it.
Yeah.
She might be tapping her toes too. Mm.
Whoops. So I did actually enjoy a nice afternoon in Twin Lakes. And the people at the B&B were incredibly nice in allowing me into my room early so I could take a nice nap and just get myself sorted out. But the next morning when I went to leave Twin Lakes, I needed to hitch a ride to the dam, which was about 4 miles up the road. It's a little convoluted how you get off the trail to get into Twin Lakes, and then you have to make up a portion of road walk to get back to the trail. So I was opting to hitch a ride, but you can see the trail is pretty empty. And so I was a little dubious about what was going to happen at 6:30 in the morning. And then I saw the guy at the general store. I saw him backing up his truck and heading my way. And he pulls up beside me, and he's got his dog, this huge dog, in the front seat of the truck. And he used some kind of pretty interesting language to tell me that he was in a really, really big hurry, and where was I going? And he was just kind of sputtering and trying to be friendly at the same time. And he said, well, if you can climb in the bed of the truck, I'll give you a ride to the dam. So I climbed into the back of the truck amongst a whole lot of boxes and other stuff, and kind of lay down because it was very cold. And he gave me a ride up to the dam. And when we got up to the dam, he apologized for being a little bit rude. He said, but I'm on an ice run. I have to go get ice before the store opens. But people like that were just such a gift all along the trail. And I was able to get right back on the trail and, start rising up yet again, got up to this point overlooking Clear Creek and a really beautiful lunch spot. And just everywhere you looked, it was beautiful. Of course, I was headed down to Clear Creek. And that meant that not only was I hiking down to Clear Creek, but I had to go up the other side in order to get to where I was planning to camp. Once again, I actually met these two guys. I say older guys, which means that they were about my age, on passing another sign that you can't quite read anymore. But then the trail started to go up, and it went up and up. It went up 2,000 feet in the last 3 miles. And when you've already done a whole lot of miles in the day, it's pretty tiring for those last few miles. And I was so glad to finally get down to the creek at the end of the day and just set up my tent. I didn't have the energy to sit and then go enjoy the stream or anything else. All I wanted to do was have dinner and go to bed. So, of course, one of the highlights of, I think, any sort of a special day like this, where you actually see that someone has put rocks in the trail that say, okay, you're now past 200 miles. People on the AT or one of these really long trails, they celebrate when they get to 2,000 miles, but I was happy to get to 200 miles. And one of the other things that I really enjoyed on this section of trail was these monument plants. And the thing about monument plants, and there seem to be quite a few of them, is that they live to be 30 years old, but they only bloom in the final year of their life. So as you can see, my notes in my journal that said, lots of beauty along the way and lots of tramping, part of the bargain. So July 20th, I actually love this. The trail started really steeply, and I don't know why. I was in the mood for a steep trail early in the morning, and there were lots of flowers. So it went from steep, and then it got steeper. I mean, there were sections of trail where I think it would not have taken much for me to have just kissed the trail in front of my face. But it was full of flowers along the way, and that's all I need to get distracted from the climb. And you got into an area where you started to see some of the really significant 14,000 foot peaks, and things they just start to look a little bit different. And this is another thing that was part of every single day, at least twice a day, sometimes more often, is filtering water, getting water out of a stream and then filtering it to always have an adequate supply of water. I carry a Camelback, but I also carry one of these plastic liter bottles as my backup. Great signage in all the national forests, and you can see this beautiful Jacob's ladder all along the stream area. And then I got to this place where my notes had said, take this side trail. It leads you up to a place up over 12,000 feet. And it was this beautiful knoll that had 360-degree views. In this particular case, this is Mount Hale. Sorry, not Mount Hale, Mount Yale. So we're in the Collegiate Peaks at this point. And just after, I sat up there for a really long time, just enjoying the view. And then another woman came up and joined me. But at that point, these clouds started to roll in, and she started getting quite nervous because she was actually wanting to be from where this vantage point, being able to see her friends who were actually trying to summit Mount Yale. And I made my way down the trail. And actually, this is a final section of some switchbacks. But earlier, when I had stopped just as I was coming out of the forest, I got a phone message. from a friend and called him, and he was very distraught about something, which was, I was able to talk him through, but at a certain point it started thundering and raining, and I said, I'm sorry, but I have to get off my phone. And I started running down this section of trail, which of course was totally exposed. And I thought, well, I'm going to be fine, because I could see, I thought there was a section of switchback where the trail actually went off into the woods. But of course I got down to that switchback and it did not go into the woods. It just kept going further down. So it was just a little excitement for the day, not a huge deal. Get down across the road and come to this absolutely beautiful creek that I followed for a couple of miles and found a beautiful campsite. But you just never knew where camp was going to be exactly. So the following day, even though it says 13 miles that I went, that's cheating. I didn't really go 13 miles. And I'll explain that in a minute. But I was on my way to Princeton Hot Springs, where I was going to pick up my next resupply box and where I was looking forward to a good lunch. And secretly, I was kind of hoping that maybe they might have a bed available, which they didn't. But setting off, heading down and saying, okay, do I see Princeton Hot Springs? Where is this town? And knowing that I was then, I came off the trail, then I got onto this dirt road, and I knew that I had many miles to hike on this dirt road. I was not looking forward to it. I don't think I went more than half a mile before a truck pulled up, and this nice guy said, do you need a ride? And I jumped in, and he not only gave me a ride down to Princeton Hot Springs, he gave me a ride to the very front door of the place where I had to pick up my resupply package. And I hung out there in the afternoon with a whole bunch of other hikers that I sometimes referred to as the patio people or the patio guys. I watched people devour huge quantities of pizza and ice cream, far more than I could, and talk about when they were going to hike the AT or the PCT for the third time. But by 3:30, I'd had my shower, found out there was no bed, so I was on my way. And once again, I had to hike, I don't know, it's 3 or 4 miles down this paved road, past these wonderful chalk cliffs to the point where I could pick up the trail. And once again, I didn't get more than half a mile before another nice young man picked me up and took me all the way to the trailhead. And from the trailhead, I only had to go up another half mile to what was called the bootleggers camp. So on this day, now you have to understand, this is July 22nd. What had happened the day before in Princeton Hot Springs, just before I got there, is that a 100-mile trail race had started. So as I started up bright and early on the 22nd, from where I was camped, all the way up this trail, and you can look at these rugged mountains and imagine what it's like to be doing a trail race in there. So early on, I was passed by the people who went on to, finish in the top 10, I'd say. But all day long, I was passed by trail runners coming in the other direction. That is something that I absolutely could never do. And I got to this metal gate on the trail. And actually, I stopped and I had this really nice chat with this woman at a stream. And then I got up the trail and I went through this metal gate and I took a picture of it because there's kind of a joke among Colorado trail hikers about the fact that some of the gates are so horrible. So they have a grading system for the gates. Then I continued down this very flat trail for about a mile and I got to a stream and I thought, I don't think this is right. And I pulled out my phone and I looked at the map and realized that I had missed a trail turn and I had to hike back yet another mile to get back to the point where I had messed up. And so at that point, I was starting to get a little fatigued, and I was starting to say, where is this campground that I'm headed for? But actually, I wasn't doing all that badly, because when I got down, here you see these beasts in the middle of the trail. These are cattle. And some people get so freaked out by the cattle in the trail that they just stand kind of paralyzed for several minutes trying to figure out how they're going to get around them or until the cattle move. And so I guess I was moving at a pretty brisk pace, and I actually caught up with the people who I'd been with at the point that I made the wrong turn. And together in the middle of this picture is actually the campground where we finally got down to. I don't know what happened to anybody else that night, but I knew that the campground manager really did not like through hikers. It was the only place that I knew of anybody being ornery and not accommodating for through hikers. But when I got into the campground, I was kind of wandering around, and there was a group of people who had a group site, and they said, go ahead and take one of our places. Once again, generosity. So I had a place for my tent, and then I went down to fill my water sacks, and I'm trying to pump water out of this very difficult pump. And someone comes out to me and says, do you need water? We're leaving tomorrow. And they bring over 2 liters of water. You know, it's just generosity all over the place. So the next day was just a beautiful short hike through up these beautifully graded switchbacks, and just coming over this hill to the highway where there was possible to get a shuttle into Salida. So the people I'd been with at Princeton Hot Springs actually had arranged for a shuttle. And when the shuttle arrived, she said, I'll just take everybody who's at the trailhead. And we crammed in many more people in that SUV than probably was legal. But a lovely woman, and she delivered us all personally to each of the places we wanted to go in Salida. And I got 2 nights in a bed, a picnic with my friend Susie, who came down to see how I was doing. And it was just an awesome visit. But the interesting thing is that the night before I left Salida, I had written in my journal, I'm feeling a little antsy to get back on the trail. And so I took the shuttle back up to the trailhead. This day, now I had a heavy food supply with me, and it was a lot of climbing, 3,000 feet over the Continental Divide with my heaviest pack. And even though there was a rain and thunder grumbling all around me, it never materialized right over me. So you get to this intersection at the top of the Continental Divide, and this is where the east and west collegiate routes come back together, and you're all unified on the Colorado Trail. So this was storms. They just kept going around and around, but I was headed down, and I came to this really lovely campsite, and where actually there was a shelter, but the shelter was really manky, and I decided my tent was definitely preferable. So the next morning I started out before sunrise, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful hike, huge views. You can see there in all these dead trees here, there's a deer, which was one of the few animals that I saw actually on the trail. And I continued on down. It was a pretty uneventful day, down again, a somewhat rough road over these cattle grates, and then camping. I had beautiful views and pretty flowers all the way. Another gate to go through. But I got down to this place called Tank 7 Creek, and there was a very large contingent camped down there. I think I got one of the last spaces. There was a couple that came in after me, And they set up a tent that looked pretty dubious. And indeed, in the middle of the night, we had a huge thunderstorm. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of frantic motion about 10 feet from me as they tried to get their tents standing upright again. So now I was really into cattle country. And at this point, you can see, you don't often see the cattle. You hear them in the trees all over the place, but you don't encounter them as often. And this was this guy who was next to me at Tank 7, who was, his trail name was Extra Credit, and he encountered this cow, and he was having a really hard time trying to decide what to do. And one of the things that I did was, as soon as we got up to this place called Sergeant Mesa, this very broad expanse, the sun was still out, but I saw gray skies up ahead, and I knew I had a soaking wet tent. And I was a little nervous about that. The last thing I wanted to do was to be in a rainstorm and get to the place where I needed to be warm and to be setting up a wet tent. So I stopped and I took the time to get my tent dry. And I was so glad I did, because probably an hour later, it started to rain, and it rained pretty continuously right up until just at the end of the afternoon when I got to the campsite at Razor Creek. And what you can't see in the meadow there, I'm actually lying in the grass because I saw a campsite that I wanted on the other side of this meadow. But what is there is a ptarmigan, and you can just make her out, but what you can't see are all of her babies. So she has all these babies. So I just sat there until she gathered up all of her babies and moved away. So when I had started this hike, when we were all together at Kenosha Pass, there was this woman named Anika who was camped with us. And she said, well, she had done probably half the trail the previous summer. And she said, if you need to leave out some sections, leave out sections 17 and 18. They're really horrible. And so I was really curious about how bad are they? So here I was. I was headed down to section 18. And I can tell you, Anika was right. I came down, was greeted by fouled streams. You know, the cattle were everywhere. It was hard to find fresh water. And then finally came around, and I noticed I found a stream that was doable for getting water, and I decided, okay, I'm just going to camp up at the top of this knoll. And because I want to do the climb, I knew I had a big climb ahead of me, and I wanted to do it when I was fresh the next day. And I was pretty glad that I'd done that, because the next day was actually beautiful in the morning. And I went up this road, a beautiful sunrise, and then I came down, and all of a sudden I was into a very open area, and I was on this road. And section 18 lived up to its reputation. This was a big open area. It went on, it went on, and it went on. And I was getting very low on my water. And in the far distance, I could see what seemed to be maybe a group of RVs very far ahead of me. And I thought, well, maybe I can, when I get there, they'll be able to give me some water. But meanwhile, I was just sipping my water, trying to conserve every little bit. And when I got down to those RVs, there was not a soul around. So what happened was I had to turn onto this gravel road, and I started walking up the gravel road, and all of a sudden an RV came up behind me, and they opened their window and they said, do you need anything? And I said, well, do you have any water? And the guy reached over, he pulled out a liter of water, and he handed it down to me. And they said, is there anything else? And I said, no, this is so great. And they said, well, they told me exactly where they were going to be camping up the road. And they said, well, if you think of anything else you need, this is where we're going to be, and come and just knock on our door. I can tell you, I was so glad to have that liter of water, because when I got up a little bit further to the stream where I'd been planning on replenishing my water, it was pretty clear that a cow had just died in that water and had been scavenged, and there was nothing left but bones. And I had no desire whatsoever to harvest any water from that stream. And I continued on up the trail, and I met this guy who was a little bit ahead of me, and he was looking for the same thing I was. We probably hiked 2 miles beyond this point. Again, it's getting a little rainy, but we did actually finally locate the spring, which was a really good source of water, and filled up all of our water. And we continued up this logging road. And he was planning on going another 3 miles, and I had said, no, I'm just going to go a little bit further and keep my eyes out for a good tent site. And sure enough, we got up probably less than a mile, and I said, whoops, there's a site exactly the right size for my tent. And I went in there and I set up my tent, and it was this beautiful grove. And I made my dinner, and I thought, well, I'm going to just kind of walk around and see what's here. Well, I walked around, and there was a lot of moose scat, and I thought, oh dear, am I on a game trail of some kind? And in my journal, I wrote, well, this is kind of nice, a kind of nice location, but I hope I'm not on a moose trail. Well, at 4:55 the next morning, I found out I was on a moose trail. I was woken by a crazed moose who was standing right beside my tent and yelling at me very loudly. And I sat there and I thought, okay, my first thought was, I do not want this moose to fall on me. I don't want it to step on my tent with me inside. And I don't want to walk out of my tent and encounter a mad moose. So I decided the best thing I could do was to turn on my headlamp to light up my tent, so it would, even with its poor eyesight, possibly see that there was really something in the way that it could not get over. Anyway, I sat in my tent for probably 10 to 15 minutes while this moose continued to yell at me. And finally, it moved away, and I was able to get up and get about my business of getting on the trail. And later that night, probably in a somewhat understated fashion, I noted in my journal, well, it was an interesting start to the day. But I absolutely loved this morning's hike. It was really incredibly beautiful. It went along this stream, and it was the first time that I actually had to take off my boots to ford this river that was about a foot deep, and then clamber up rocks on the other side. And then you went along a portion of the trail that's referred to as the Skyway, and it was incredibly beautiful. You could see the stream, and I couldn't help but just keep looking down in the stream, hoping to see some moose or other wildlife, but actually all I saw was deer along the way. But in the right-hand picture, you see some big clouds starting to build. You know, it's typical Colorado afternoon. And as I go across this very exposed area, I keep looking for groups of trees, thinking, well, I don't want to go stand under a single tree if a thunderstorm comes. I really want to find some I want to see where there are some groups of trees that might be a little bit safer. And a trail runner came past me, and there was a point where the trail forked, and he said, well, I want to get to the trailhead before the thunderstorm hits. So he was trying to get down to this building that's ahead of us, which is really, it's near the trailhead. It's nothing more than a stockyard. I started across this area, and I was feeling pretty good. The thunders all seemed to be kind of around me, not particularly close to me. And all of a sudden, there was a bolt of lightning that hit the ridge very close to me, and a huge crack of thunder. And I turned so fast. I mean, it was just totally on impulse that I turned and I ran like mad for this group of trees. And I threw off my pack with my, my lightning rod on it. That was my extra pole. And then I ran myself up to another group of trees and just sat there until this storm had passed, or it seemed anyway to be safer to proceed. But I have to say that was probably the most frightening point on this hike. But I will say also that afternoon I continued on. It was really damp and I was happy to have a dry tent at the end of the day. My back was starting to hurt. I was not feeling all that great. But again, you wake up, it's another sunny start to the day. And this was a day that I wrote about later. I just said, climb, descend, climb, descend, climb, descend. That was the kind of day it was. And you'll see a graphic of that. And after a soggy night, it was really nice to see the sun. So the trail went through this thick area of larkspur. It was so beautiful, but again, you were getting wet all the way up over to San Luis Pass. But I love any trail where I can see the objective and see where I'm going. And once I got up there, once again, spread out my tent, and I resisted the urge, which many hikers have, to actually take this side trail and go up to having, being able to say, oh, I've climbed a 14,000-foot peak, which is the summit of San Luis Pass. But this, I was feeling so happy. I was getting into the real mountains and it felt really good. So this was just an up and down day, my final descent down to a stream, and found a perfect campsite. But you can see up, down, up, down, up, down, and then trying to find another half mile up to get to an actual camping spot. So the next day, I was very motivated. I got up before, I actually got up in the dark and I started hiking up these switchbacks. I knew that I was headed to Lake City for 2 nights. And it was just perfect. I went up the switchbacks in the dark, which I love doing. You can't, they aren't hard in the dark. And the sun came out just as I was getting off the switchbacks and getting to more interesting sections of the trail. Went over these snowfields, went through all these thick willows, and then I had my breakfast sitting on the top of the Continental Divide, looking over Snow Mesa. And it came down and I'm approaching this big rock and I hear all this noise, I mean, loud noise. And just as I get to that big rock, there is a huge marmot and he's this one that's been yelling at me the whole way. But continued on past over Snow Mesa, and it was so beautiful, so long, but so beautiful. Descended down, got down to the trailhead. I had 2 hours to wait for a shuttle. I sat there with someone else for 20 minutes when a couple came up and said, oh, do you need a ride into Lake City? Another bit of generosity. You get into Lake City and there's a church that has actually turned their church hall into a place for hikers. So it's just a whole space for hikers to use, to refuel, they have some snacks there, they have computer access there, and there's a volunteer there to help you if you need it during portions of the day. And they also run a shuttle up to the trailhead twice a day. So, and Lake City also had a great ice cream parlor. But I got back on the trail, and it was really interesting because this August 3rd day, it was my hiking brain just was really not with me that day. I just did not have a good hike. It was very pretty, but long stretches of flat mesa where it just seemed to go on, and then all of a sudden you drop off the side and you'd come back up the other side. And I think if I'd had someone with me, I might have gone a little further. But I got to this place where I just said, you know, I'm done. That's okay. But on August 4th, it was a whole different mindset because I was in a place now. I was getting into a part of the San Juans where I'd been before, and I was really looking forward to seeing if there were places that I'd recognize. And so even though it was a real huff and puff of climbing, as I made my way, you'll see here to the high point at over 13,000 feet, it was still a really, really beautiful morning, and I was so exhilarated to be there. And then I came down the other side, and you come very steeply down this mass of eroded trails, and the ATVs were on the trail. And one of the guys asked me if I wanted to ride, and I thought I feel safer walking down than riding one of those things on this rutted road. And then you started up this valley, I guess you'd say, this drainage, and got about 3/4 of the way up, and I looked down, and there were 6 moose. Just watching the hikers in the trail. But it was such a great moment, and it was so much fun to look down the trail at the hikers behind me to see when they noticed the moose as well. And this was such a beautiful pass. We came over the pass, came down this beautiful through these meadows, and came down to this wonderful lake, Cataract Lake, and everybody else set up in the lake, but I set up in this clump of willows in this little grove. And I was really glad I did because it was very, very cold that night, and everybody else had wind coming off the lake, and I was at least protected, although it was frost. So when I set out the next morning, I'm gonna stop talking so much because I just want you to see how beautiful this was to be climbing through this area. So for the people who are watching this who know that I often hike with one pole, but I will say this was an area where I took out my second pole because it was like walking on ball bearings, and there were huge steep drop-offs. And I thought, you know, that wise choice, Margot, make the wise choice. I wish I was a better photographer so I could get these huge expanses because they are so amazing. So finally, I got to this place where I had to walk a little bit along this road, and you can see in the left-hand picture, you see a big snowfield. Well, the snowfield is covered with sheep. This is very common in the San Juans to meet up with a shepherd and a flock of sheep. But it's not difficult to get through the sheep. They're not bothered. And I continued on up, and other people were continuing on up to a lake, but I stopped about 2/10 of a mile short of the lake because I knew once again the lake was going to be exposed. It was going to be a cold night, and I found a really nice sheltered place right below it where I stayed by myself, and had a great night's sleep. Woke up really early, was ready to hop out of my tent at this point, because this was the day that I'd been waiting for probably more than any other. This was a day full of memories, and it did not disappoint. You get to the point where the Colorado Trail and the Continental Divide Trail divide actually at this point, but I was also keeping an eye out for these little mountain ponds, such as you see here, because we had camped next to some, and I thought, oh, I wonder if I'll ever see one that I'll actually remember. But this also was the first time that I saw Arrow and Vestal peaks ahead of me, kind of in the middle of your screen. And we had camped right under them 35 years ago. And I was so excited when I saw them. It was really quite an emotional moment. So this is the lakes. We camped near one of these lakes also, and many years ago. And this was right before going down into Elk Creek, a very steep descent. As you can see in the grass the switchbacks going back and forth very, very steeply. And all the way at every turn, just another alpine garden. So this is looking back to where I'd come. But it's also very tricky. This trail is it's very steep, and you have to really pay attention to what you're doing. So again, I was curious to know, how do we get to Arrow and Vestal Peaks from the Elk Creek Trail? Because I remembered a big bushwhack. And finally, I got to the point where I saw them, and now I knew how we had done that all those many years ago. So below on the left, you see the train tracks for what is the backpackers train. And this is the Animas River Bridge, which you'll see again in a couple of minutes. Crossing the Animas River, beginning the climb. So, and in the left-hand picture here, you see the actual train coming through. It's the narrow gauge railroad coming through here. And now I'm at I'm just below Mullis Pass and getting to the campground at Mullis Lake. And that was where I decided to end my hike. My back was bothering me way too much. And I decided to go off the trail, go down to Silverton for a few days, and decide what I'd do about finishing the trail. So this is me packing up after my last day on the trail. And I went down to Silverton, and lo and behold, who's there but Shark Bait? And we had a nice morning. And then I went up. This is a memorial. You go quite a ways up this hillside, and there's a memorial in remembrance of a Easter Sunday when all of the mines, something happened and there was a huge mine flood. But it's in Thanksgiving for the fact that because it was Easter morning, there was absolutely nobody in the mines. And there were all kinds of mine ruins. And then I took the narrow gauge railroad to Durango. Fabulous experience. And you are right on the edge of the cliff all the way. But as I said, you'd see it before. Here it is. This is the Animas River Bridge that I had just crossed the day before, a couple of days before. And this will be my starting point when I go back this summer. So I'll take the backpacker train, start in at mile 406, and I have 4 segments to go to the end at 484.6. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed that.
Margot, we have a couple questions I think would be good to start off with. First of all, what is your trail name?
So my trail name is actually Whitecap, which comes from that was from the Long Trail, actually, where a guy said, oh, I remember you because you're always in your white cap. And so I said, okay, that's fine. I'll take it.
Very nice. Very nice. And there's another question. Somebody said, obviously you hiked in July and August.
Yep.
Do you think this is the best time to go, or is there another best time you would recommend?
Well, a lot of people do it in August and early September, but you're very high in the mountains, so you're apt to run into snow. I mean, it's the safest time from a snow perspective. And when you get later in August, the trail, the water resources really dwindle.
Got it. Thank you. Anybody else who has questions, feel free to just ask Margot at this point. Looks like we have one new message. Oh, just a lot of greats. Thank you. Excellent presentations.
Yeah, well, I was glad to do it. It's really good for me to look at the photographs and remember the hike, because I realized actually when I go back to the trail that I need to do a better job of visually recording some of the places that I am. Because I couldn't remember where I camped and things like that. And that bothered me a little bit.
Your
Well, I
pictures are
do.
beautiful, Margot.
Yes, very beautiful, wonderful photographs, and really captured, at least for me who has never been there, that this was great to see all of the wonderful views.
Well, thanks. A little longer than I expected, but that's okay.
Well, we thank you. We thank you. Again, are there any questions that we have for Margot?
A couple questions. Margot, how long do you think it'll take to hike the 4 segments?
I'm thinking that the big challenge is going to be that I'm going to be arriving from sea level and really start going up to 9,000 feet right away. I think I'm going to have 24 hours of acclimatization. So it depends how quickly I can really get my hiking legs under me, but I'm thinking that it'll probably be 5 days.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So no need to stay at a motel. You can camp the whole thing.
I'll camp the whole thing, yeah. Because I have a mandate, you know, I have to get myself to August camp.
I was going to say,
So though I have a changeable flight, I don't think anybody else considers that it's changeable.
are you managing August camp?
I'm going to be the camp director for weeks 1 and 2.
All right.
Wonderful. Very exciting. Thank you.
Other questions for Margot?
How did you prepare for all of this, Margot? You had many days with 12, 14 miles of hiking
Yeah.
on a regular basis. What do you do to get in shape and stay in shape for that sort of activity?
Well, I have a pretty specific exercise routine, but I think that also, I mean, I have to say, you know, my orthopedist gave me some exercises, and some of the exercises she gave me, if I do them religiously, I noticed a big difference when I got on the trail. And so I do hike a lot with a full pack before I go. I mean, I'm training now for a backpack in May, and I'm wearing my backpack pretty continuously when I go out hiking, fully loaded, just to get used to it, feel like it's just part of me.
How heavy is it fully loaded?
Well, I'm hiking in Arizona in May, so I'm preparing for the fact that I might have to carry a lot of water. So right now, when I took it out the other